At the beginning, someone was thinking about Vanitas Linworm, the cold-blooded son of a marquis who appeared in a certain novel. He was a villainous aristocrat who enslaved others and committed countless atrocities, eventually meeting a dark and lonely death. That person soon realized that they had been reincarnated as that despised character, abandoned by everyone. Inside a vast palace, Vanitas was sitting in front of a mirror, touching his face as he thought that this was Vanitas' face and that his body appeared rather weak. He guessed that he was around 15 years old. He thought that he still had not fully sorted everything out, but little by little, his memories were becoming clearer. When he had first woken up, he had not even known who he was. Vanitas' father had called out that Vanitas was awake, while his mother cried out in relief, calling him Vanachan and thanking the heavens. Lying on his bed, Vanitas had noticed that the people who seemed to be his parents were crying out of worry, and that a butler and a maid stood behind them. According to what they had said, he had been unconscious for 3 entire days and nights. Afterward, Vanitas placed a glass cup on the table, sat on his bed, and thought that back then he had not understood anything. But as his memories returned, he realized that in his previous life, he had lived in a completely different world, one filled with towering skyscrapers and streets overflowing with people. Nostalgic images burned into his mind. In that world, he had once read a certain novel. Though he could not remember its title, he remembered seeing Vanitas in it. Vanitas had appeared as the antagonist, enslaving the heroines and forcing them to serve him. The protagonist had eventually defeated him, and Vanitas had lost the heroines. In the end, he had been enslaved himself and died alone. Vanitas thought that he did not know why he was here, or who he really was. But if he lived as he was now, he would be doomed. With a serious expression, he clenched his hands and refused to accept that fate. From then on, he began gathering information. After placing several books on the table, he said aloud that it was time to do this. Sitting on a chair and reading, Vanitas thought about the inevitable duel with the protagonist. He concluded that it was most likely an unavoidable event and wondered if there was any way to win. Suddenly, he uttered the word magic in surprise, realizing that in this world there existed something called magic. Magic that manipulated fire and water, and magic that could alter the appearance of people and objects. These magic spells allowed the caster to make almost anything possible through imagination. In the novel, the only magic Vanitas had ever used was a basic long-range spell called Light Arrow. However, if his memory was correct, this world contained a long-lost magic that had been deemed impossible to master. A magic so difficult that it had been completely forgotten, except by him, the reincarnated one. Standing up in shock, Vanitas realized that this was it. He recalled that this magic had only ever been mentioned as part of the world's mythology, a small piece of fan service added by the author. Suddenly, his hand began to glow, and he immediately recognized it as domination magic, the ability to manipulate the magic particles in the air to control all matter at will. Then the light faded, and Vanitas thought that it would probably take some time before he could use it properly. Still, he smiled, thinking that with his power, he might be able to change his doomed fate. The scene then shifted back to the palace where Vanitas was sleeping in bed. He mumbled in his sleep, sat up with a yawn, and wondered if it was morning already. He remembered that he had spent most of the previous night reading about magic, as expected of a marquis's house. Their collection was quite impressive. When he heard a knock at the door, he thought that the people there were really kind. A maid entered with a tray of tea and nervously greeted him with a good morning, saying that his clothes and drink were ready. Sitting on his bed, Vanitas told her to just leave them there, and she agreed. As he continued reading, he noticed something strange. The maids in the mansion all moved stiffly. Watching the girl tremble, Vanitas quickly realized the reason. Suddenly, the maid shouted nervously that his hand was on her. Vanitas looked down and saw that his hand was resting on her buttocks. He responded absent-mindedly, realizing his mistake, and the maid ran away, begging to be excused. Looking at his hand, Vanitas thought that apparently the original Vanitas used to grope the maids and even resort to violence. His body had moved on its own. He thought that even if his personality had changed after reincarnation, old habits must die hard. He decided he couldn't afford to dwell on that incident because that day was an important one. As he changed his clothes, he thought about the 2 main reasons behind Vanitas' downfall, the first being his defeat by the protagonist, and the second being the loss of his 3 enslaved heroines. He concluded that even if he managed to beat the protagonist, it would be meaningless if the heroines abandoned him. Vanitas recalled their names and backgrounds. Christina March was a noble lady of high birth whose elegance and beauty made her seem far above a slave. Hildegard was a cheerful, battle-loving foreign knight. Rapina was a beastkin with rare, lustrous black fur. Vanitas thought that today, for the first time, he would meet those three. It was his chance to build a good relationship with the people who held his fate in their hands. But more than that, he genuinely wanted to meet them. In his fading memories, their smiling faces still shone brightly. However, when Vanitas finally saw them, those smiling heroines appeared instead with fearful, lifeless expressions. Their eyes were empty. March addressed him as master, and Rapina asked what his command was for the day. Vanitas looked at them tensely, realizing that slaves who had suffered under Vanitas's cruelty could not possibly think kindly of him. Still, he knew he couldn't leave things as they were. He apologized for calling them there so suddenly, explaining that he had simply wanted to see them. Their faces stayed tense. Vanitas then called Christina to come closer, and she obeyed hesitantly. He recalled that in the novel there had been a scene where Christina complimented Vanitas's looks, and if that detail had any meaning, he should test it. As she approached, he greeted her warmly. Christina blushed and flinched, pushing him back and apologizing. He cut her off gently, admitting that he had gotten too close, and said that he had only wanted to see her face up close. He admired her smooth skin and clear, confident eyes, saying that the more he looked, the more beautiful she seemed. Christina's blush deepened, and she told him not to say such strange things, calling him unfair. Vanitas noticed her gaze drift aside, and thought that Christina probably did like Vanitas's appearance. So if someone she despised complimented her beauty, that reaction made sense. Next, he called Rapina, who trembled as she responded. Vanitas thought that among the three, Rapina had suffered the worst abuse from Vanitas because of her small stature and quiet nature. There had even been scenes in the novel where Vanitas had physically assaulted her. Rapina sat on his lap, blushing and making soft, distressed sounds. Christina panicked, asking what Vanitas was doing. Vanitas wondered if Rapina truly thought he was about to hurt her. Raising his hand slowly, he gently patted her head and complimented her fur, saying it was so soft he could touch it forever. Rapina's blush deepened as she stammered and trembled. Christina nervously asked him not to be too rough, but Vanitas replied that he still wanted to touch Rapina a little longer, asking if that was not okay. Rapina blushed even more, letting out small, flustered sounds, and Vanitas noted that it seemed she didn't mind. He asked if he could touch her tail as well, and Rapina made shy, hesitant noises. Christina, blushing as she watched them, finally shouted for Vanitas to stop, pulling Rapina back and begging him to just tell them what he wanted or needed to do. Rapina remained flustered, and Vanitas thought to himself that it was a shame since he had wanted to touch her a bit longer. He wondered if he had only made her more wary of him. Looking at them, Vanitas realized that the only one left was Hildegard, who had been silently watching him for some time. Hildegard said that her master was strong but weak. Weak but strong. Vanitas, taken aback, remembered that Hildegard was the daughter of a warrior from the Lepet tribe. The Lepet tribe respected the strong and protected the weak. Vanitas, who had been weak in both body and magic, had originally been someone Hildegard was meant to protect. But now, as she looked at him, she instinctively felt that he was not truly Vanitas. Hildegard then declared that she wanted to fight her master to uncover the truth. Vanitas, understanding that her clan valued strength above all, accepted her challenge. Soon, they stood together in an open field. Vanitas prepared himself for the mock battle, thinking about testing his newfound ability. He invoked domination magic, determined to give it a small test and see just how powerful it truly was. Vanitas stated that the field would be suitable, and then told Hildegard that it was time to begin their mock battle. Vanitas thought again about Hildegard, the daughter of the proud warriors of the Lepet tribe. He knew that if this were a real fight, he would not walk away unharmed, but this mock battle was a chance. Vanitas wanted to test his domination magic and see if he could use it effectively in combat. Christina shouted that it was far too dangerous and insisted that if it was a mock battle he wanted, she could take his place, just like they usually did. Vanitas refused, saying that if he did that, there would be no point. This was his opportunity to show everyone how much he had changed. Reborn as a reincarnator, he declared himself the new Vanitas Lindworm. Christina and Rapina were both stunned by his words. Vanitas then told Hildegard that she didn't need to hold back. Hildegard acknowledged his command and said that she would fight seriously. Taking a fighting stance, she immediately launched a mud shot toward him. Both Christina and Rapina gasped in shock. As the mud flew toward him, Vanitas raised his hand and called to activate, but the mud struck him directly. Christina, Rapina, and Hildegard all froze in disbelief. Vanitas fell to the ground, and Rapina rushed over, asking if he was all right. Christina shouted that this was exactly why she had warned him. It was too dangerous. Lying on the ground, Vanitas muttered in frustration. Then, as he stood up and laughed, he said that there was no way it would work perfectly just by trying on the spot. He told Hildegard to come at him again, just like before. Christina called out to him with a worried expression, but Vanitas reassured her that he would be fine. Wiping the mud off his face, he thought that Hildegard's magic seemed to be mud-based. He already knew he would take a few hits, but told everyone to continue. Hildegard nodded nervously and resumed the mock battle, launching multiple mud shots. Vanitas dodged them swiftly, astonishing both Christina and Rapina. Christina whispered Vanitas' name in disbelief. Hildegard fired another barrage, and Vanitas, seeing them coming, raised his hand and took the direct hit while shielding his eyes from the splattering mud. Hildegard smiled faintly at the exchange. As the scene shifted upward toward the sky, Vanitas stood before Hildegard, his handsome face completely covered in mud. Watching from the side, Christina murmured with concern about his face being soiled. Breathing heavily, Vanitas looked at Hildegard and asked if she was having fun. Hildegard smiled and replied that her master was still weak, but stronger than before, and that it was fun. Vanitas, still catching his breath, announced that this would be the last one, and that he would show her what he could do. Hildegard's smile faded as she asked if they were really going to fight seriously. Vanitas confirmed and told her to come at him with everything she had. Christina and Rapina both watched with tense expressions. Hildegard responded that she would use her full power and began chanting a spell. She shouted, "Mud Spiral Bomb." As she launched it, both Christina and Rapina looked alarmed. Vanitas invoked domination magic, raising his hand to dismantle the spell. The attack shattered instantly. Christina gasped in disbelief, exclaiming that the master had deflected the magic. Immediately after, Vanitas dashed toward Hildegard, grabbed her hand, and used his magic to seal her movements. Hildegard fell to the ground, bound and blushing, exclaiming that she couldn't move and asking what was happening. Vanitas knelt before her and explained that this was all the power he could use for now. Through domination magic, he was concentrating the mana in the air, and at that moment, even if Hildegard used all her strength, she wouldn't be able to move. He reassured her that she didn't need to worry, as the binding would soon fade away. Then suddenly, Vanitas collapsed to the ground. Both Christina and Rapina screamed his name and rushed toward him. Christina caught him in her arms, asking if he was okay. Vanitas, breathing weakly, said that he was fine and apologized, calling her Fuku. The binding spell dissolved and Hildegard, still confused, softly called out to her master. Vanitas looked up at Hildegard, and she told him that what he had done was incredible, but that he seemed different from before, as if he were a completely different person. Christina, still tense, asked what exactly a reincarnated one was. Vanitas stayed silent for a moment, then lay back on the ground and said that he was who he was, and that their former master, the one who had oppressed them, was gone. Christina, Rapina, and Hildegard were all shocked. Christina asked what he meant by that. Vanitas explained that hearing something like that must be confusing, but from now on he would be fighting against fate itself, and for that he would need the strength of all three of them. Vanitas called out Christina's name, and she immediately answered nervously. Then he called Rapina, who responded softly. Finally, he called Hildegard, who replied with a smile. Vanitas told them that he knew there was still much they didn't understand, but he wanted them to come with him, raising his hand toward them. He said that he would be counting on all three of them from now on.